Hey YouTube, this is Khan here back again with some more Magic the Gathering Arena. And today we'll be doing a deck tech and showing a little bit of video for a deck that I've been playing, not so much on the rank, but against other people, and that's Rakdos Control. So let's jump in and take a look at what's currently in the deck. Currently this deck itself is only made for best of one, even though I will be building a sideboard for it. I haven't gotten to it. We're now starting to play. New season basically is out for Arena, so we're now playing best of three for all of our ranks. I recently put up a video for Esper Control, which is one of the decks I've been playing in rank. This is another control deck, Rakdos, which you might have seen. I've released some videos earlier. This is going to be the deck tech for those videos. And then also I have another Orzhov control deck that we'll be looking at a little bit later down the line. But right now, let's concentrate what's on Rakdos. So with the new set, Ravnica Allegiance, Rakdos is one of those colors that you will hope that would be elevated up. It wasn't really as big, so to say, in the last set. Beforehand, you could probably do Rakdos when you in Ixalan, when you had all the pirates and so forth. It had more tools that you can use, but once we went to Ravnica, it's not as strong of a guild. But with the new Ravnica Allegiance, we have more cards, more things we could do with it. And I played, and I've shown before on the channel, Rakdos Burn, Rakdos Aggro, all types of different versions of the deck. But one thing I have not shown was the control deck. So this is what we're going to go through. As stated before, I have videos, gameplay. There'll be some gameplay afterwards for this. It won't be any my normal commentating. I'll be commentating afterwards because there was an issue with the audio for it when I taped it. But regardless, let's see what's in the deck. The main purpose of this deck, as you can tell by the cover art for this deck, is Captive Audience. That's the first card we'll cover. Captive Audience, since I first saw it, I thought was a very interesting deck. I kind of misread it. So when I misread it, I thought it was they got to choose different things, like they chose whether or not their life was total, was this, discard their hand, and then when they say each opponent, I always thought that each opponent was on their side. I didn't read the point that it comes under control of your opponent. For some reason, I missed that. So once Captive Audience was released, I got the card and I reread it again. I was like, this is pretty interesting. This is literally a 3-turn clock. Typically, if they don't have answers, of course. You can reduce their total to 4, which opens them up to Banefire. You make them discard their hand, which is perfect against control decks. And then, or they give you 5 2/2 black token creatures, which basically puts them on the 2-turn clock if they don't have any type of way of blocking. So I said, let's make this a deck based on it. So thus we have the Rakdos control deck. The second part to this card that I want to play is Inescapable Blaze. And why am I playing Inescapable Blaze instead of Banefire? It's a very good, very good question, because Banefire is more, let's say, you could play Banefire. It's what's the words I'm looking for? Banefire is better in decks because you can use it in better situations. Inescapable Blaze is just a flat 6. You know, Banefire, you could wait, they could build up health, you could build up your, based on your mana and how many you have, and you could go higher than 6, and you can still finish them off, even if they have ways of gaining life afterwards. Say they have an Angel of Grace and they go back to 10, at least with Banefire you have enough lands, you can still do what you need to do. Understood, but the reason why I want to play Inescapable Blaze is because no one plays this card. And it's crazy, because most people who play red usually play red aggro. So they're trying to win by turn 5, turn 6. So an Inescapable Blaze, while it sounds, you know, hey, let's have this as a finisher, it doesn't make sense in most decks. So most people don't play it. You rarely ever see mid-range red decks. And then when you do see mid-range decks that usually, or control decks that usually do have red, most of them are going to use Banefire. So No one rarely ever uses Inescapable Blaze. I wanted to use Inescapable Blaze because I think it's a good card, even though no one ever uses it. It can't be countered, and it deals 6 damage, and you could deal it to any target. You could deal it to Planeswalker, you could deal it to creatures, you could deal it to the player. It's a beautiful card that gets no play and no one ever sees. So currently right now we have 2 of those in the deck. I was thinking about moving up to 4. And the main reason why I was thinking about moving to 4 is this. This Rakdos control deck has 2 major decks that it has a problem with. The first deck is Orzhov control, or Orzhov midrange. Orzhov has a lot of ways of dealing with captive audience, so it has a lot of problems with that. And then the second one would be typically usually one control decks, because control decks can counterspell. With Inescapable Blaze, you can consistently toss and hit people with it, and with 6 of those, that's 24 damage. You typically can win the game alone off of just those 4 cards. But right as of right now, we're only doing 2. When we go into best of 3, which will probably come later, then you'll see probably more Escapable Blaze. Maybe in the sideboard, maybe in the prime deck. We'll see how we want to do that. So going forward with the deck, what we have to look at then is we know what our top finishers are for the game. Let's look at what we're going to do for the early game. So against aggro decks, I put in 3 deadweights. This is very good against aggro white, Boros, red, mono red. I said white already. Hey, even Selesnya. It's very good against those, getting rid of those cards. You can put them on Land of War Elves to slow them down. You can put them on pretty much any of the red cards to kill them. So it's a pretty decent card, and it costs 1 black, 1 swamp. So hey, why not? Let's put Deadweight in. I've always liked Deadweight. I thought it was a pretty good card. We put that in there. Duress. Duress originally wasn't in the deck. Duress was put in the deck later, mainly for control decks. Because of the counter spells and so forth, we need Duress. Duress isn't something that I typically would play early on, per se, in the match. If I'm going against control, this is something that I will play later on. So I will put out 1 card that I know they'll counter, and then I'll throw in a Duress, which will force them to make a counter. And that only costs me 1 land, 1 mana. And then from them countering, after they did all the things that they do, then therefore I could put out the real card that I want to put out, whether it be Angraf, or whether it be Ill-Gotten Inheritance, whatever card that I need to play at that time. Duress will then take the counter spell for it and only cost me 1 land. So that's the main reason why we play Duresses. I may put more in, or put in more cards that allow me to look into my opponent's deck. But right now, we'll think about that later in the sideboard. I have to look at the weaknesses, and those, as I stated before, Orzhov and control decks are the biggest weaknesses for this Rakdos control deck. So we'll balance our sideboard according to those. Found Renewal may not be in this deck, but the main reason I keep it in the deck is mainly against red. We need some type of life. Some way to get life, and out of black and red, there's not many ways to get life. You can get life off of a lot of black cards, but for red, there's not many ways to get life. So I usually put in 2 Found Renewals. It gives me a little bit of health, and it allows me to sustain against going against mono red itself. We have 3 Lava Coils just to take care of early creatures. Does 4 damage and exiles creatures. Beautiful against drakes. We still see those Izzet drakes, so we will use them against those, and then also against a lot of red decks and other creatures that may cause us problems with higher toughness than the typical 2 or 3. Light of Stage, great card, overpowered card. A lot of people want to see it banned. It's a tool that mono red should not have. It's a great card. A lot of times, because we don't directly attack people, we will be using light up the stages at 3 costs, unless we have Ill-Gotten Inheritance out, and then, or maybe Risk Factor, and then we'll be able to use the Spectacle. But most of the time, you'll be using it at 3. But love light up the stage. Risk factor, another way for us to draw cards and then also put out some damage. It's also a good way to search for cards. So once we have out captive audience and they're down to 4 life, risk factor then becomes just a draw for us. They can't take the 4 damage. They'll allow us to draw 3 cards, and then that will allow us to get, say, Inescapable Blaze or Ill-Gotten Inheritance to allow us to finish them off. Bedevil, very good card. We don't use it against most artifacts. There's not really a lot of artifacts that we're worried about, but we do use it mainly for the Planeswalker aspect in the creatures. Very, very good card for removing Planeswalkers. So we run 2 of those, and then another card we'll get to later as our main removal for Planeswalkers. And the main reason why we need this card is for Golgari. Golgari rarely ever plays Assassin Trophies. Usually not. If they do this, usually in their sideboard. They usually mainly will play Vraska or Vivian as their main source of artifact and enchantment removal. So having Bedevil is very good, especially if we're going to play our captive audience. Ill-Gotten Inheritance is another way for us to finish off our opponent if we get it out early. It's giving us life sustain and slowly taking away their life while giving us 1 life, so it's another card that we could use to give us life every turn. But once captive audience is out, once they do -4, at any time we could play 6, and we could take off 4 life to them and gain 4, which also will finish them off. So it just makes sense. It's synergy with captive audience that we would actually have that card. Ritual Soot, mainly used for clearing the board. A lot of those 3 or less cost monsters against Mono Red, against Golgari, against Selesnya, getting rid of tokens and so forth. We run 2 of these just to clear the boards in those situations. Vraska's Contempt, as I said earlier, mainly used as our removal for Planeswalkers, but in some cases we may use it also to clear out creatures and give us life. Our second tool for clearing out creatures is Eldritch Reborn. Eldritch Reborn also will allow us to get back our Planeswalker, which we'll cover in the next card, and then also allows us to get blockers to kind of stop aggro and other cards from directly attacking us in the face. Angrath, beautiful card. I always loved Angrath. I've always wanted to use Angrath in a lot of Rakdos decks, and as you may have seen before my earlier deck when I did the aggro, we did have Angrath, but Angrath didn't fit. By the time we got to a point where we would cast Angrath, there was no point in it. Either we won or we didn't, and casting Angrath did not turn the tides enough in our favor. So I think Angrath plays better in mid-range and control decks. So this being a control deck, Angrath allows us to 1, get rid of our opponent's hands, 2, get rid of our opponent's creatures of 3 or less and turn them against them, and then 3 also allows us to do sustained damage every turn. 2. So love Angrath. He's a very good card. We only have 2 of those in this deck. Last but not least, we have Rakdos. Rakdos was an interesting card to choose. I often say, hey, if you're going to do a Rakdos deck, you should always have Rakdos, the showstopper, in it. Rakdos, of course, is a coin toss, literally, in terms of clearing the board. So a lot of times we don't have any global wipes. We do have Ritual Soot, but that only clears out creatures 3 and lower. So when you have a lot of creatures, Rakdos basically comes in as our, I hope we do it, board clear to clear out everything that we see. I was thinking about Carnarium, but it only does 2, -2, and it doesn't really help us. Rakdos is probably the best bet that we have in terms of clearing out the board. One other thing Rakdos also is good for is he's a good blocker and a good finisher. So once they go down to 4 health, 1 hit from him and it's lights out. And they better have something with good defense, good toughness, because he does have trample. So it's very easy to put out 4 damage with Rakdos even if they block. Our lands are pretty simple. We have 8 swamps, 7 mountains, 4 of the Blood Crypts, 4 of the Dragon Skull Summits, and then 1 Detection Tower, mainly for our hexproof creatures that we may come across. And that's pretty much Rakdos.
No fire, no steel. No fire, no steel.
Sorry I'm late. Reverse! Hurry! Keep up the pace! Now what?
No fire, no steel. No fire, no steel. Never seen war. No fire, no steel. Here be monsters. No fire, no steel. No fire, no steel. No fire, no steel.